I'd been on my feet for 18 hours straight when the call came. A level 3 blizzard was tearing the city apart. And our hospital, Metro Grace, was an island in the storm. Running on backup generators and fumes, the ER was a war zone. Then, over the chaos. A stat call, code blue. P4. Pediatric. P4. The parking garage. My blood went cold. A nurse shouted that a family was stranded. Dead. With a child in full respiratory arrest. I ran to the crash cart and saw it. The last portable pediatric ventilator. A single life-saving machine. And I knew I had to make a choice. I grabbed the handle of the ventilator. The plastic was cold. What do you think you're doing? Ramirez. Dr. Kevin Stanton. My rival for the new pediatric fellowship. He physically stepped in front of the cart, blocking my path to the ER doors. He was always there, waiting for me to make a mistake. There's a kid coding in the garage. Kevin, get out of my way. That's the last portable unit. He hissed. His eyes narrow. He pointed a finger at the machine. You take that thing out of this ER. You're violating Protocol 9B. Ressources diversion during a crisis. Mark Vance will have your badge for this. He'll fire you on the spot. I looked at his smug face. Then at the swinging doors, I could almost hear the child's panicked, failing breaths. I looked back at Stanton. Then he can have it. I said, I shoved the cart too hard. It hit his legs, and he stumbled back, his face twisting in shock. I pushed past him and slammed through the doors into the ambulance bay. The wind hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just snow. It was pellets of ice, stinging my face, instantly soaking my thin scrubs. The sound was a deafening roar. I gripped the ventilator, pushing it against the storm, my feet slipping on the ice-covered concrete. The P4 garage was supposed to be 20 yards away. It felt like a mile. The wind tried to rip the machine from my hands, but I leaned my whole body into it. Help over here, a voice screamed. I saw them. A Dirksov. Completely snowed in, its hazard lights flashing like a weak pulse. I shoved the ventilator the last few feet. The side door slid open. A woman was in the back, crying hysterically, holding a small boy. His lips were blue. His chest was barely moving. He's not breathing. She sobbed. I know. I'm here. I'm Dr. Ramirez. I didn't have time for fear. I was all adrenaline and training. I ripped the intubation kit open. I need you to hold his head. Just like this. Keep him still. My hands were shaking. Not from the cold, but from the focus. I got the tube in. I hooked him up to the ventilator. The machine whirred to life. And then that perfect, beautiful sound. The rhythmic hiss of air. The boy's eyelids flickered. A tiny bit of pink, a fragile bloom of life, returned to his cheeks. The woman wept. Oh God! Oh God! Thank you. A man stepped out from the driver's side. He was older, with gray hair, wearing a simple suit that was already covered in snow. He was perfectly calm. The storm howled around us. But he looked at me like we were in a quiet office. He put a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm. You saved him. He's stable for now. I said, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely speak. We need to get him inside. We will. He said. He studied my face, his gaze intense, like he was memorizing me. What's your name? Ramirez. I said, trying to pull my soaked, frozen hair off my face. Dr. Jessica Ramirez. He nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact. Dr. Ramirez, he said, his voice quiet but carrying easily over the wind. You've done more than you know. I just nodded, too cold and exhausted to understand what he meant. Let's go. We have to carry him. We got the boy onto a stretcher from the bay and fought our way back to the ER doors. The warmth and light hit me like a wave. I handed the boy off to the waiting trauma team. He's intubated. Stable. I managed to say. I leaned against the wall, dripping, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Across the ER, through the glass window that looked into the administrative wing, I saw him, Dr. Stanton. He was standing in a darkened office, just watching me. His face was unreadable. As I watched, he slowly raised his phone to his ear and turned away from the window. I didn't care. The boy was alive. That's all that mattered. I was wrong. That wasn't all that mattered. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of fluorescent lights, humming, the smell of dust, and the rhythmic thud of the digital scanner. My world shrank to the four walls of that basement room. I indexed charts from 1998. I digitized patient files from 2003. I did the work, kept my head down, and tried not to think about the fellowship I had lost or the career I had buried. The isolation was complete. The few colleagues who even made eye contact would give me that tight, sympathetic smile. You're a good doctor, but your radioactive smile. Then, one Tuesday, the atmosphere in the hospital changed. The air felt static, charged. Whispers started in the cafeteria and echoed down to the basement. An unscheduled audit from the board. People were panicked. Mark Vance was apparently living on coffee and antacids, snapping at everyone. I just kept my head down. It had nothing to do with me. I was just the ghost in the chart room. I was running a stack of files up to the surgical floor when I saw them. A group of suits, all dark gray and blue, walking the floor with a nervous-looking Mark Vance. Vance was smiling, but it was a desperate, brittle smile. He was pointing at new equipment, practically bowing. Leading them was a man I couldn't quite see. He was older, with gray hair, and he carried an aura of absolute, unbothered calm. He wasn't looking at the equipment Vance was showing off. He was looking at the nurses, at the patients' families, at the cracks in the wall. I ducked back into the stairwell before they saw me. It didn't matter. They were from a world I didn't belong to anymore. At 13:50, an email hit my terminal. My heart jumped into my throat. Dr. Ramirez. Report to the main boardroom. 1400 hours. This was it. This was the final act. The audit was over. And they were cleaning house. Vance was going to make an example of me to the board. See, we've handled the problem resident. My hands were shaking. I smoothed the wrinkles on my cheap, ill-fitting scrubs. I felt the eyes of the department head on me as I walked out of the basement. The walk from the chart room to the top floor boardroom felt like miles. Every step echoed on the polished floor. I felt like a prisoner walking to her own execution. I pushed open the heavy oak door. The room was silent. Mark Vance was at the head of the long, polished table, looking pale and sweaty. A few other senior administrators were there, all staring at their hands, and at the far end of the table, sitting alone, was the man I'd seen earlier. The man with the gray hair and the calm, steady eyes. He was reading from a file. My file. He stood at attention, my heart hammering against my ribs. You wanted to see me. Mark Vance started to speak. Dr. Ramirez. This is... But the man at the end of the table slowly closed the folder. Hay looked up, and his eyes met mine. The world stopped. It was him. The man from the garage. The suit. The storm. The blue-lipped child. It all came crashing back in a single, thunderous moment of recognition. He studied me. A flicker of something unreadable in his expression. The room was so quiet, I could hear the air conditioning. Then, he spoke. His voice was just as I remembered it, quiet, calm, and carrying absolute authority. Dr. Ramirez, he said, the hint of a smile touching his lips. I believe we've met before. I stood there, frozen. My mind was racing, trying to connect the man in the $1,000 suit with the desperate father in the snow-filled garage. Mark Vance, completely oblivious to the universe that had just shifted under his feet, let out a nervous, wheezing laugh. Yes. A difficult night for all of us. Mr. Sterling. Dr. Ramirez was just... Well, she was the center of a significant protocol deviation we've since handled. He motioned to me as if presenting an exhibit. Mr. Sterling. Dr. Ramirez is the very example of the field deviation case I mentioned in my report. The incident with the ventilator. I could see Dr. Stanton sitting at the far end of the table with the other residents, trying to hide a smirk. He was enjoying this. My final public humiliation. David Sterling looked at Vance. His calm expression didn't change, but his eyes were like ice. A deviation. Yes, I read your report. Mark, tell me, was the equipment damaged? Vance blinked. Thrown off. Well, no. See. But was any other patient in the ER harmed due to the temporary absence of that specific machine? Sterling's voice was quiet. Analytical. No. Technically. But the risk. Was the mission of this hospital to save human life upheld? Vance's pale face was now slick with sweat. Sir, I don't see how that applies to a clear breach of... Then the only failure I can see here... Sterling interrupted. His voice cutting through Vance's excuse was a catastrophic failure of judgment. Vance nodded enthusiastically. A look of pathetic relief on his face. Exactly. Sir, my point precisely. A failure of judgment on her part, which I corrected immediately. Sterling stared at him. The silence in the room became heavy. Suffocating. No. Mark? Sterling said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Though it echoed in the dead quiet room. My judgment in hiring you... Vance's smile froze and shattered. Sir, I don't understand. Sterling stood up slowly. He wasn't a large man, but his presence suddenly filled the entire boardroom. He walked from his end of the table, past me, and stood directly behind Mark Vance's chair. That family in the garage... Mark, he said, placing his hands on the back of Vance's chair. The one you referred to as a liability risk. That was my daughter. And that child, the one in respiratory arrest. That was my grandson. The air was sucked from the room. I felt my knees buckle, and I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. Vance looked like he had been shot. He tried to speak, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. You demoted a doctor. Sterling continued, his voice a low, lethal hum. For saving my family. You publicly humiliated her. You took your finest resident, a woman who risked her own safety to uphold the very oath this hospital was built on, and you buried her in the basement because she ruined your spreadsheet. He leaned in closer. You enforce protocols, but you've forgotten their purpose. A hospital that punishes compassion, Mark, isn't a hospital. It's just a building. It's a failed business. And you are a failed leader. David. Mr. Sterling. Please. Vance whispered, his face ashen. I had no idea. If I had known... That's the entire point. Sterling said, his voice full of ice, it shouldn't matter who it was. You should have treated them as if they were my family. You should treat everyone as if they are my family. That is the job. He walked back to the head of the table. As of this moment, you are relieved of your duties as administrator. Security will escort you from the building. We're done. Vance stared, uncomprehending. His career, his entire identity. Eyes had just been evaporated in 30 seconds. But Sterling wasn't finished. He picked up another paper from his file. One last item. It seems the formal complaint that triggered this review was an anonymous email sent from an internal terminal. He looked up, his eyes scanning the table, and they landed with terrifying precision on Dr. Kevin Stanton. Stanton had gone from smirking to ghostly white. An email, Sterling said, time-stamped at 10:04 p.m., just 2 minutes after Dr. Ramirez left the ER to save my grandson. An email sent by Dr. Kevin Stanton. Stanton shot to his feet. Sir, I was concerned for hospital resources. I was acting in good faith. Sterling just looked at him with a kind of weary disgust. You were acting to remove your competition for the fellowship? We reviewed your other emails. Doctor, you've created a culture of fear among the residents. Hoarding cases. Bullying nurses. You are the worst kind of physician. Stanton, one who cares about a career, but not about the work. You can't do this. Stanton stammered. I can. Sterling said, you will finish your residency, but it will not be here. Pack your locker. You're dismissed from the Metro Grace program. Stanton looked at me, his eyes wide with a hatred that was so pure, it was almost primal. Then he turned and walked out of the room, followed by 2 security guards. The room was silent. Vance was slumped in his chair. A broken man. I just stood there, my heart pounding, trying to breathe. David Sterling looked at me. The ice in his eyes was gone, replaced by that same calm warmth I remembered from the storm. Dr. Jessica Ramirez, he said. It seems we have an opening for an acting chief of resident operations. I want your instincts running this floor. Can you start today? I think I just nodded. I couldn't speak. The whiplash of the last 10 minutes from disgraced outcast to acting chief of resident operations was too much to process. The weeks that followed were a blur. I moved out of the basement and into an office with a window. The whispers in the hallways didn't stop, but their tone changed. They went from pity and suspicion to a kind of quiet awe. Dr. Stanton was gone. Mark Vance was gone. And the doctor who'd been indexing charts, was suddenly running the resident program. But David Sterling wasn't done. About a month later, He called me to another meeting. This one wasn't in the main boardroom. It was in a smaller, warmer conference room. It was just him, me, and the new hospital administrator, a woman who actually looked like she'd seen a patient before. On the table between us was a single document. Jessica, Mr. Sterling said he'd insisted I call him David. I'm flying to our other campuses this week. I want to make what happened here a permanent part of our culture, not a one-time event. He slid the paper toward me. I read the title, Protocol 9B. Addendum C, the Compassion Clause. My breath caught. I read the text. It was simple, clear, and powerful. It stated that any hospital staff member who broke protocol in a good faith effort to render immediate, life-saving aid would not be subject to disciplinary action. It said that in a conflict between protocol and a human life, the human life must always win. Your name is on this. David, I said, pointing to the title, The Sterling Foundation Compassion Clause. He smiled. That same calm smile from the storm. You're right. Let's fix that. He uncapped a pen, crossed out Sterling Foundation, and wrote something else. He slid the document back to me. It now read the Ramirez Compassion Clause. That's better, he said. Your mistake. Doctor is now our new policy. It will be in the handbook of every doctor, nurse, and administrator at all 12 Sterling Foundation hospitals by the end of the month. I looked down at the paper, at my name, and the words blurred. The vindication was so complete, so absolute. It felt almost heavy. My single act of defiance in the snow hadn't just been forgiven. It had been institutionalized. Later that evening, after my shift, I found myself walking to the P4 garage. The spring air was warm, and the scent of rain was on the pavement. I stood in the exact spot where the SUV had been stranded. I leaned against the concrete pillar, remembering the ice, the wind, the sound of the ventilator, and the child's blue lips. I thought about Mark Vance. I'd heard he was now managing risk for an insurance company. He was probably happy. All back with his spreadsheets. I thought about Dr. Stanton, who had to restart his residency in another state, his reputation in tatters. And I thought about David Sterling, a man who had the power to punish, but chose to build instead. I realized then that true integrity isn't just about making the hard choice. It's about what you do after. It's about having the courage to see a mistake and find the lesson in it. Not just the liability. For every person who has ever had to make a hard choice, this story is for you. If it touched you, share it. Remind someone that integrity isn't about following the rules. It's about knowing when to follow your heart. And if you've ever faced your own storm, may you find the courage to do what's right.